Hello friends, if you want to watch super hit movie Wild Wild West in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Friends, in today's video, the movie we're going to talk about is called Wild Wild West. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I am going to tell you, I am also going to give you all the information on which OTT platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, box office collection of this film. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will also give you a small review of the story of this film. Apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film's storyline, star-cast actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the ends, so let's start the video. Wild Wild West is a 1999 American steampunk western film directed by Barry Sonnenfeld and written by S. Wilson and Brent Maddock, alongside Jeffrey Price and Peter S. Seaman, based on a story conceived by Jim and John Thomas. Loosely adapted from The Wild Wild West, a 1960s television series created by Michael Garrison, it is the only production since the television film More Wild Wild West, 1980, to feature the characters from the original series. The film stars Will Smith, who previously collaborated with Sonnenfeld on Men in Black 2 years earlier in 1997, and Kevin Kline as two U.S. Secret Service agents who worked together to protect U.S. President Ulysses S. Grant, Kline in a dual role, and the United States from all manner of dangerous threats during the American Old West. The film features a supporting cast consisting of Kenneth Branagh, Salma Hayek, Ted Levine, and M. Emmett Walsh, as well as an orchestral film score by Western film score veteran Elmer Bernstein, and extensive visual effects courtesy of Industrial Light and Magic. Released theatrically in the United States on June 30th, 1999 by Warner Bros. And produced on a $170 million budget, making it one of the most expensive films ever made when adjusting for inflation at the time of its release. Wild Wild West was a commercial failure, grossing only $113.8 million domestically and $108.3 million overseas for a worldwide total of $222.1 million. Receiving largely negative reviews from critics, the film was nominated for 8 Razzies and won 5 at the 20th Golden Raspberry Awards, including Worst Picture and Worst Original Song, for the song Wild Wild West by Smith. Plot: 4 years after the end of the American Civil War in 1869, U.S. Army Captain James T. Jim West and U.S. Marshal Artemus Gordon cross paths with each other in their hunt for ex-Confederate General Bloodbath McGrath, seemingly responsible for a massacre in New Liberty, where West's parents were killed. U.S. President Ulysses S. Grant informs them about the disappearances of America's key scientists and a treasonous plot by McGrath, giving them the task of finding the scientists. Aboard their train, the Wanderer, West and Gordon examine the severed head of scientist Thaddeus Morton, finding a clue that leads them to Dr. Arliss Lovelace, a legless ex-Confederate officer and engineering genius. Infiltrating Lovelace's plantation during a party, the duo rescues a woman named Rita Escobar, who asks for their help in rescuing her father, Guillermo Escobar, who is one of the kidnapped scientists. Lovelace holds a demonstration of his newest weapon, a steam-powered prototype tank, and uses McGrath's soldiers for target practice. Accusing McGrath of betrayal for surrendering at Appomattox Courthouse, Lovelace shoots and leaves him for dead. Gordon, West, and Rita find McGrath, who reveals Lovelace framed him for the massacre before dying. Upon catching up with Lovelace on the Wanderer, a panicked Rita accidentally releases sleeping gas during a brief fight, knocking out West, Gordon, and herself. West and Gordon wake up as Lovelace pulls away in the Wanderer, taking Rita hostage. Announcing his intention to capture Grant at the Golden Spike ceremony, he leaves the duo in a deadly trap in a cornfield. After narrowly escaping, West and Gordon stumble across Lovelace's private railroad, leading to his secret industrial complex at Spider Canyon. There, they witness Lovelace's ultimate weapon, a giant mechanical spider armed with nitroglycerin cannons that he uses to capture Grant and Gordon at the ceremony, while West gets shot and left for dead by one of Lovelace's henchwomen upon being caught sneaking in the spider. At his complex, Lovelace announces his plan to dissolve the United States, dividing the territory among Great Britain, France, Spain, Mexico, the Native American people, and Lovelace himself. When Grant refuses to surrender, Lovelace orders Gordon to be executed, but West, having survived, disguises himself as a belly dancer and distracts Lovelace, allowing Gordon to free the captives. Lovelace escapes on his spider, taking Grant with him. As Lovelace once again demands that Grant surrender, he refuses, and Lovelace responds by destroying a small town. Using a flying machine, Gordon and West catch up to the spider, where West battles Lovelace's henchmen before confronting Lovelace himself, now on mechanical legs. After freeing Grant, Gordon shoots one of Lovelace's legs, allowing West to gain the upper hand. As the mechanical spider approaches a cliff, Lovelace shoots at West with the concealed gun he used to kill McGrath, but instead hits the spider's machinery, halting it abruptly at the canyon's edge. Both West and Lovelace fall from the spider, but West survives by catching a chain dangling from the machinery. Grant promotes Gordon and West as the first agents of his new United States Secret Service. As Grant departs on the Wanderer, West and Gordon reunite with Rita and attempt to court her, only for Rita to reveal that Professor Escobar is actually her husband. Gordon and West ride into the sunset on the Spider. Cast: Will Smith as U.S. Army Captain James T. Jim West, Kevin Kline as U.S. Marshal Artemus Gordon, U.S. President Ulysses S. Grant, Kenneth Branagh as Dr. Arliss Lovelace, Salma Hayek as Rita Escobar, Ted Levine as General Bloodbath McGrath, M. Emmett Walsh as U.S. Marshal Coleman, Biling as Miss May Lee East, Rodney A. Grant as Hudson, Garcelle Beauvais as Belle, Musetta Vander as Munisha, Sophia Eng as Miss Lippenrider, Frederic Vander Waal as Amazonia, Gary Carlos Cervantes as Professor Escobar, Michael Sims as Professor Thaddeus Morton, Jerry Potter as plantation owner George Washington at Gala, Ian Abercrombie as British dignitary, Ismael East Carlo as Mexican dignitary, Orestes Matacina as Spanish dignitary, Christian Aubert as French dignitary, E.J. Callahan as Alan Pinkerton, Deborah Christopherson as Dora Lookalike, Scott Sandler as Young Joe Finnegan, uncredited, Derek Mears as Metalhead, uncredited, David Lee as Thug with Knife, uncredited. Production, development. Variety first reported in January 1992 that Warner Bros. Had optioned the film rights to Michael Garrison's television show The Wild Wild West and hired Richard Donner to direct a film adaptation written by Shane Black, with Mel Gibson in the role of Jim West. Donner coincidentally directed 3 episodes of the original series. However, Donner and Gibson left the project to work on a film adaptation of Maverick, another film based on a Western TV series, in 1994. Despite this, the project continued in the development stage, with Tom Cruise rumored for the lead in 1995. Cruise instead starred in a film adaptation of Mission Impossible the following year. Discussions with Will Smith and Barry Sonnenfeld began in February 1997 after the two had wrapped up production on Men in Black for Columbia Pictures the same year. Smith declined to do the lead role in The Matrix in order to star in Wild Wild West. Warner Bros. Pursued George Clooney to co-star with Smith as Artemus Gordon, with Kevin Kline, Matthew McConaughey, and Johnny Depp also in contention for the role, while screenwriters S.S. Wilson and Brent Maddock, best known for writing the Short Circuit and Tremors films, were hired by the studio to script the film between April and May 1997. Clooney signed on the following August after dropping out of Jack Frost, while the Wilson-Maddock script was rewritten by Jeffrey Price and Peter S. Seaman, best known for writing the films Who Framed Roger Rabbit and Doc Hollywood. However, in December 1997, Clooney was replaced by Kline after an agreement with Sonnenfeld. Ultimately, we all decided that rather than damage this project trying to retrofit the role for me, it was better to step aside and let them get someone else. Writing. The film featured several significant changes from the television series. For instance, Dr. Lovelace, as portrayed by Kenneth Branagh in the film, went from a dwarf to a man without legs who uses a steam-powered wheelchair, similar to that employed by the villain in the episode The Night of the Brain. His first name was also changed from Miguelito to Arliss, and was given the motive of a Southerner who sought the defeat of the North after the Civil War. Kevin Kline plays Artemus Gordon in the film, whose character is similar to the show's version of him portrayed by Ross Martin, except that he is much more egotistical than Jim West. The film depicted Kline's Gordon creating more ridiculous, humorous, and implausible inventions than those created by Martin's Gordon in the original series, as well as having an aggressive rivalry with West, unlike in the television series, where he and West had a very close friendship and trusted each other with their lives. While Gordon did indeed impersonate Grant in 3 episodes of the series, The Night of the Steel Assassin, The Night of the Colonel's Ghost, and The Night of the Big Blackmail, they were not played by the same actor. Additionally, West was originally portrayed by Robert Conrad, a Caucasian rather than an African American, which serves a critical plot point as West's parents were among the victims of Lovelace's massacre at New Liberty. John Peters produced the film alongside director Sonnenfeld. In a 2002 Q&A event that appears on An Evening with Kevin Smith, filmmaker Kevin Smith talked about working as a screenwriter for Peters on a 5th potential Superman film in 1997. He revealed that Peters demanded, among other things, that Superman fight a giant spider in the 3rd act. After Batman director Tim Burton came on board, Smith's script was scrapped and the film was never produced due to further complications. A year later, he noted that Wild Wild West, with Peters on board as producer, was released with the inclusion of a giant mechanical spider in the final act. Neil Gaiman also revealed that Peters insisted that a giant mechanical spider be included in a proposed film adaptation of The Sandman. Filming, principal photography was set to begin in January 1998, but was pushed 3 months later to April 22, 1998. The interior sequences on the trains of both Artemis Gordon and Dr. Lovelace were shot on sets at Warner Bros. Burbank Studios, 4000 Warner Boulevard, Burbank, California, while the exterior sequences were shot in Idaho on the Camas Prairie Railroad. The Wanderer in the film is portrayed by the Baltimore and Ohio 440 No. 25, one of the oldest operating steam locomotives in the U.S. Built in 1856 at the Mason Machine Works in Taunton, Massachusetts, it was later renamed the William Mason in honor of its manufacturer. During pre-production, the engine was sent to the steam shops at the Strasburg Railroad for restoration and repainting. The locomotive is brought out for the B&O Train Museum in Baltimore's Steam Days. The William Mason and the Inyo, which was the locomotive used in the original television series, both appeared in the 1956 Disney film The Great Locomotive Chase. Much of the Wild West footage was shot around Santa Fe, New Mexico, particularly at the Western Town film set at the Cook Movie Ranch, now Cerro Pelon Ranch. During the shooting of a sequence involving stunts and pyrotechnics, a planned building fire grew out of control and quickly overwhelmed the local fire crews that were standing by. Much of the town was destroyed before the fire was contained. Music. The orchestral film score, including its main theme, was composed and conducted by Elmer Bernstein, a veteran of many Western film scores, such as The Magnificent Seven. The score mainly follows the Western genre's symphonic tradition, while at times also acknowledging the film's anachronistic playfulness by employing a more contemporary music style with notable rock percussion and electronic organ. The score also briefly incorporates Richard Markowitz's theme from the original television series in one cue, uncredited in the film and not included on the album. Ironically, this was one of the film's few elements that were faithful to the series, which also did not credit Markowitz for the theme. Additional parts of the score were composed by Bernstein's son Peter, while his daughter Emily served as one of the orchestrators and producers. Like most of his films during this period, Will Smith recorded a hip-hop song based on the film's plot, also titled Wild Wild West. Wild Wild West was a #1 hit on the U.S. pop charts, though it also won a Golden Raspberry Award for Worst Original Song. It was produced by Rob Fusari, who lifted a sample from Stevie Wonder's 1976 hit I Wish. The song also features guest vocals from R&B group Dru Hill and was a star-making vehicle for Dru Hill lead singer Sisqó. Old-school rapper Kool Moe Dee had previously recorded a Wild Wild West single of his own in 1987, to which he re-performs the chorus from his old Wild Wild West as the chorus of this new Wild Wild West. A performance of the song by Smith, Dee, Dru Hill, and Sisqó at the 1999 MTV Movie Awards also included Wonder performing a reprise of the chorus on piano. Score. All music is composed by Elmer Bernstein, except as noted. Release. Upon release on June 30th, 1999, alongside Paramount Pictures and Warner Bros. R-rated film South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut. Several news reports arose stating that adolescent moviegoers purchased tickets into seeing the PG-13 rated Wild Wild West in theaters, but instead went to see the South Park film. This was a result of a film industry crackdown that made sneaking into R-rated films tougher for children, as proposed by U.S. President Bill Clinton at the time in response to the moral panic generated by the Columbine High School massacre, which had occurred 2 months before the release of both films. Marketing. Warner Bros. Heavily promoted Wild Wild West as an anticipated summer blockbuster instead of Brad Bird's animated film The Iron Giant, which was released 2 months after Wild Wild West. This sparked controversy as The Iron Giant was becoming more critically successful than the critically panned Wild Wild West upon release, despite eventually underperforming at the box office due to the studio deciding to spend their money on marketing for Wild Wild West, among other films. Home media. Warner Home Video released Wild Wild West on VHS and DVD on November 30th, 1999, on Laserdisc on December 28, 1999, and on Blu-ray on May 29, 2011. Reception. Box office. Wild Wild West grossed $27,687,484 during its opening weekend, with a total of $40,957,789 for the Independence Day weekend, and ranking first at the North American box office. It dropped into second place below American Pie in its second weekend, making $16.8 million. The film ended its theatrical run on October 10, 1999, after 5 months, having grossed $113,804,681 domestically and $108,300 overseas, for a worldwide total of $222,104 against a production budget of $170 million, making it commercially unsuccessful. Critical response. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film has an approval rating of 16% based on reviews from 131 critics, with an average rating of 4.1 out of 10. The site's critical consensus reads, "Bombastic, manic, and largely laugh-free, Wild Wild West is a bizarre misfire in which greater care was lavished upon the special effects than on the script." On Metacritic, the film has a score of 40 out of 100 based on 25 critics, indicating generally mixed to negative reviews. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of C+ on an A+ to F scale. Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times gave the film 1 star out of 4, writing that Wild Wild West is a comedy dead zone. You stare in disbelief as scenes flop and die. The movie is all concept and no content. The elaborate special effects are like watching money burn on the screen. Janet Maslin of the New York Times gave the film a negative review, saying that the film leaves reality so far behind that its storytelling would be arbitrary even by comic book standards, and its characters share no common ground or emotional connection. Accolades. Wild Wild West later ranked in the listed bottom 20 of the Stinkers 100 Years, 100 Stinkers list, which noted the 100 worst films of the 20th century at number 2, but lost to Battlefield Earth. Soundtrack. A soundtrack containing hip-hop and R&B music was released on June 15, 1999, by Interscope Records and Overbrook Music. It peaked at number 4 on both the Billboard 200 and the top R&B hip-hop albums. Video game. An action-adventure video game titled Wild Wild West, The Steel Assassin, was developed and released by South Peak Interactive on December 7, 1999, almost 6 months following the film's release. Lawsuit. In 1997, writer Gilbert Ralston sued Warner Bros. Over the upcoming feature film based on the series. Ralston helped create the original television series The Wild Wild West and scripted the pilot episode The Night of the Inferno. In a deposition, Ralston explained that in 1964, he had been approached by producer Michael Garrison, who said he had an idea for a series, good commercial idea, and wanted to know if I could glue the idea of a Western hero and a James Bond type together in the same show. Ralston said he then created the Civil War characters, the format, the story outline, and 9 drafts of the script that were the basis for the television series. It was his idea, for example, to have a secret agent named Jim West who would perform secret missions for a bumbling President Grant. Ralston's experience brought to light a common Hollywood practice of the 1950s and 1960s when television writers who helped create popular series allowed producers or studios to take credit for a show, thus cheating the writers out of millions of dollars in royalties. However, Ralston died in 1999 before his suit was settled, resulting in Warner Bros. Paying his family between $600,000 and $1.5 million. Wild Wild West is a comedy dead zone. You stare in disbelief as scenes flop and die. The movie is all concept and no content. The elaborate special effects are like watching money burn on the screen. You know something has gone wrong when a story is about two heroes in the Old West, and the last shot is of a mechanical spider riding off into the sunset. Will Smith and Kevin Kline co-star as special federal agents who are assigned by President U.S. Grant to investigate the disappearance of lots of top scientists. They stumble over a plot to assassinate Grant by a megalomaniac who wants to give half the country back to Britain and Spain and keep the rest in the hands of the villain. Salma Hayek, who claims her father is one of the kidnapped geniuses, teams up with them. The bad guy, Dr. Arliss Lovelace, Kenneth Branagh, is a mad inventor who makes steam-powered iron tarantulas, which are not very practical in Monument Valley, but who cares? Certainly not anyone in the movie. Smith and Kline have so little chemistry, they seem to be acting in front of rear projections of each other. They go through the motions, but there's no eye contact. Imagine Bill Clinton and Kenneth Starr as partners in a celebrity golf tournament. The Kline character is said to be a master of disguise, and first appears in drag as a dance hall girl, wearing a false plastic bosom so persuasive that when a real siren turns up later in the movie, her décolletage looks unconvincing by comparison. That doesn't stop Smith from giving her cleavage a few jolly thumps, and then telling a white lynch mob he was simply following the example of his African ancestors, who communicated by pounding on drums, and bosoms, I guess. In a movie where almost nothing is funny, the race references are painfully lame. One of the running gags is about how the Kline character can invent almost anything right on the spot. He rigs a rail car so that it can shoot people into the air, have them fall through openings that appear in the roof, and land in a chair. The rig works in opposition to the first law of motion, but never mind. In a movie where anything can happen, does it matter that anything does? Branagh's character has no body from the waist down, but operates from a clever wheelchair and later with mechanical legs. He has weird facial hair and lots of bizarre plans, and an evil general on his payroll who has a miniature ear trumpet permanently screwed into the side of his face. His gigantic artificial war machines look like they were recycled from Star Wars 1977, right down to their command posts. There are moments when all artifice fails, and you realize you are regarding desperate actors trapped on the screen, fully aware they've been left hanging out to dry. Consider an early scene where Will Smith and a sexy girl are embracing in a water tank when the evil general rides into town. Smith is made to watch the action through a knothole, while continuing to make automatic mid-air smooching movements with his lips, as if he doesn't realize he's not still kissing the woman. Wild Wild West is so bad, it violates not one but two rules from Ebert's Bigger Little Movie glossary. By casting M. Emmett Walsh as the train engineer, it invalidates the Stanton-Walsh rule, which states that no movie with Harry Dean Stanton or M. Emmett Walsh can be altogether bad. And by featuring Kevin Kline without facial hair, it violates the Kevin Kline mustache principle, which observes that Kline wears a mustache in comedies but is clean-shaven in serious roles. Of course, Kline can always appeal on the grounds that although he is clean-shaven in his main role here, he sports facial hair in several of the other roles he plays in the movie. Or perhaps he could use the defense that Wild Wild West is not a comedy. Wild Wild West is a 1999 American steampunk western movie co-produced and directed by Barry Sonnenfeld and written by S.S. Wilson and Brent Maddock alongside Jeffrey Price and Peter S. Seaman. It is based from the 1960s television series The Wild Wild West. It stars Will Smith and Kevin Kline. The movie is about two U.S. Secret Service agents who work together to protect U.S. President Ulysses S. Grant. The movie also stars Kenneth Branagh, Salma Hayek, Ted Levine, and M. Emmett Walsh. It was released on June 30th, 1999 by Warner Bros. And was one of the most expensive movies ever made at the time it was released. Wild Wild West was a commercial failure, making only $222.1 million. It had strong negative reviews. A hip-hop song, also titled Wild Wild West, was a #1 hit on the U.S. pop charts. It also won a Golden Raspberry Award for Worst Original Song. The song was performed Will Smith featuring the R&B group Dru Hill and was produced by Rob Fusari. It contains a sample from Stevie Wonder's 1976 hit, I Wish. Kenneth Branagh is shit. Like, I get that this is his attempt at Rickman's Sheriff, but it's so far off the mark that it stinks. And that is beautiful. If it wasn't for this performance, I would not have trusted Branagh as Lockhart in Potter. To me, this was the stuffy Shakespeare dude who sang the theme tune, wrote the theme tune when it came to his 1996 Hamlet, and I just didn't like what he represented. Until this, I knew he was, and is, an incredible actor. I appreciated what he was attempting in accepting the role, and it showed me he wasn't the perfectionist I thought he was. I will also point out, I didn't know it was him until much later. Kevin Kline provides a straight man foil of a similar ilk to Rimmer in Red Dwarf. Now, the chemistry between him and Smith doesn't quite work. Smith is no Lister. However, the only person who could have played it better would have been Chris Berry himself. The element of Jim West's story, the loss of his parents, comes in way too late. We're way past the halfway mark when it is revealed why West is hell-bent on apprehending General McGrath. Played a little too well by Ted Levine. This motivation would have encouraged the audience to engage more with the character. The CGI still stands up. Yes, that should be a good thing. However, it's an indicator that the budget was not well distributed and more could have been diverted to the script. After all, what's the point in having stunning visuals if no one will watch them? The racism commentary and the casting of Will Smith. I cannot even say that the film is attempting to create a revisionist history like Hamilton or Django Unchained. There are too many writers involved for it to be that clever or intentional. Because of this, it fails where both Hamilton and Django Unchained succeeded. Instead of it being a commentary about racism, it simply presents a black character in a heavily racist landscape. The script then also attempts to challenge the racist commentary with comedic wordplay. At the time of its release, this would have gone over my head, but watching it today, just because Jim West can counter Lovelace's passive-aggressive, how nice you could join us and add color to these monochromatic proceedings, with, when a fella comes back from the dead, I find it an occasion to stand up and be counted, does not negate the racism or the ableist intent either for that matter. Without getting too deep into the social politics of this, because I simply don't know enough to truly comment, however, by making a joke of Confederative thinking, could confuse younger viewers on what is and isn't appropriate to say in society. On a similar note, I would say much of the same applies to the treatment and commentary of women, particularly those of heavier body shapes. It certainly also applies to Artemis and his concealing himself as a woman during missions. It's hard to know if we should see it as the art form of drag or as being coded trans. Either way, the fact that the payoff is that James West mistakes a cis woman as Artemis makes the whole thing in bad taste. Review: Wild Wild West was a go-to movie for my friend and I back when we were growing up. Between the two of us, we could, and still can, quote the movie in its entirety. Having watched this many times over the years, I acknowledge that the nostalgia factor might affect my enjoyment of the film, as I have found several flaws since watching it as a young lad. However, that doesn't mean it still can't be enjoyed on its own merits. Right out the gate, this movie is goofy. Not funny, although it is that too, but goofy. Artemis Gordon's inventions feel a little too perfect for the situations they get Gordon and Jim West out of. Arliss Lovelace's beard rivals Crane's beard from The Hunger Games for most intricate movie beard, acting as the proverbial "I'm the bad guy" sign. Lovelace's invention to bring the U.S. government to its knees is a giant steampunk tarantula. Everything about this movie screams Saturday morning cartoon. Nevertheless, it has a sense of fun that many films miss, which is why it still works for even as I've grown older. Wild Wild West never takes itself seriously, making it fun for both the actors and the audience. The humor can be seen as a little juvenile, like the scene below, but that kind of humor is what I like. Will Smith and John Kline are enjoyable to watch together. This film came out relatively early in Smith's film career. It is fun to see how he has brought the same energy and personality to his characters throughout all of his movies, whether they were in the 90s, when he started film acting, or today. I'll admit I haven't seen many of Kline's films to compare Artemis Gordon to his other roles, but his comedy here is more subtle than Smith's, which works because having two boisterous comedians would be too much. Besides the two leads, the other two big supporting actors, Salma Hayek and Kenneth Branagh, are clearly having a good time too. The often scantily clad Hayek is obviously there for the eye candy and to give West and Gordon someone to compete for, but it doesn't appear to bother her, and she gives a memorable performance. Branagh gets fully into the maniacal villain role. It's cartoonish and over the top, but he steals his every scene he's in. I thought Wild Wild West was good. It isn't afraid to be silly and have fun with itself, which might turn off other viewers, but I really enjoyed that. Everyone, from Will Smith and Kevin Kline to Salma Hayek and Kenneth Branagh, feel like they are enjoying themselves. I grew up watching this film regularly, and although its imperfections have become more apparent over the years, it still is every bit the fun, adventurous romp I remember it to be. The year is 1869, and Jim West, Will Smith, is a desperado, rough rider. No, you don't want nada. In his position as a desperado and a rough rider, West works as a special agent for the U.S. Army. In pursuit of General Bloodbath McGrath, Ted Levine, a former Confederate general who appears intent to keep fighting the Civil War, he bumps into U.S. Marshal Artemis Gordon, Kevin Kline, an eccentric inventor whose meticulous nature and dislike of guns don't exactly chime with the impetuous, trigger-happy West. Wouldn't it just be the craziest darn thing if these chalk-and-cheese coppers were forced to work together? In Barry Sonnenfeld's 1999 sci-fi western, we learn that no, it would not. The problem with Wild Wild West is that it is a phenomenally stupid movie that thinks it is moderately clever, that just because it injects elements of steampunk, the buddy cop genre, and a suffocating level of ingratiating sarcasm into a Western setting, it is somehow interesting. In some respects, it is interesting, since there can be few films that rival it for use of nonsensical movie logic. At one point late in the film, after Jim and Artemis have discovered that the real mastermind behind McGrath is Dr. Arliss Lovelace, Kenneth Branagh, a mad scientist who he lost his legs and most of vital organs fighting for the South. Lovelace's master plan involves using an 80-foot-tall robotic spider to force President Ulysses S. Grant, Kline, to dissolve the United States so that Lovelace and a group of foreign powers can carve it up. As our heroes rush to stop Lovelace, we see Grant at a ceremony to commemorate the joining of the two halves of the Transcontinental Railroad. The ceremony is meant to end when Grant strikes a metal stake into the tracks, but every time it is placed in the hole, it falls over. As it becomes apparent that the stake is being knocked out of position by vibrations, Grant turns around, the camera pulls back, and everyone at the event is shocked to see the foot of Lovelace's giant spider, the cause of the vibrations, crashing into the ground. This would be an effective bit of tension building, but for one thing, the crowd that have gathered to watch Grant are all arranged so that they are facing him. This means that they are all looking in the direction from which the spider is approaching. Furthermore, when we are shown a shot of the spider approaching, we see that it's traveling across completely flat terrain on a clear and sunny day. There is no possible way that everyone there, including the guards, whose job it is to make sure no one attacks the president, who, as the film has already informed us, has been receiving death threats, could have missed the giant mechanical spider lumbering across the desert towards them. Wild Wild West is littered with moments like this, and whilst it might seem like nitpicking to point out all the stupid little things in a movie in which Will Smith and Kevin Kline are pitted against a torso played by Kenneth Branagh, the fact is that any fantasy or science fiction film has to have some sense of reality to it. Otherwise, nothing that happens in it has any weight or value. To use another example, West is at one point shot at point-blank range with a pistol, which causes him to fall from the top of the mechanical spider to the ground below. He survives the gunshot wound because he's wearing a bulletproof vest, but the fall really should have broken his back. This is something that could be written off as just one of those things that happens in action movies, but in the climax of the film, he has a four-way fistfight with a bunch of Lovelace's goons, in which falling from the spider is meant to be a dangerous thing. But why is it dangerous? It didn't kill him the first time, and then he wasn't preparing to fall. He only fell because someone shot him. Why doesn't he just jump down whenever things get too rough, dust himself off, hands, shull, then climb back up? Wild Wild West not only doesn't have any grounding in our reality, it has no grounding in its own reality. All of this wouldn't be so bad if the stupidity was fun and interesting, but the film is fantastically dull. I saw Wild Wild West in the cinema back in 1999, and I'd remembered it being about 3 hours long. It turns out it was just the procession of airless, boring action sequences, limply strung together, that made me think that. As for the cast, they all appear to be starring in very different movies. Smith plays the Will Smith character, a smooth-talking ladies' man who is equally as quick with either a quip or a fist, who seems to have wandered on from the set of Bad Boys. Smith's character is the most problematic since, in casting a black actor in a film that takes place in the South during Reconstruction, it forces the film to grapple with the racial aspects of the period. Whilst that would be commendable in, say, a revisionist Western, it feels horribly out of place in a silly blockbuster, and the constant jokes about slavery make the film a much queasier experience than it ever needed to be. Kenneth Branagh, meanwhile, seems to have been cast as the villain in a James Bond movie written by Yosemite Sam. He's a grotesque caricature who is too over the top to be menacing, but who is too openly violent, racist, and misogynistic to be funny. He embodies the film's general attitude towards women and sex, which is both juvenile and weirdly chaste. It's a film which references S&M and uses crude double entendres, like cramming a man's private things into some hole. Actually, that may just be a single entendre, in which there is never really any chance that either Smith or Kline will get together with ostensible love interest Salma Hayek. Just as the film is obsessed with people getting shot, but hardly ever shows any blood, it is obsessed with sex, but never comes remotely close to actually being sexy. The one saving grace of the film is Kevin Kline, who delivers an often hilarious deadpan performance that nicely undercuts the absurdity of everything going on around him. Watching Wild Wild West the second time through, I was surprised by how much he managed to get out of a part that was clearly intended as nothing more than a foil for Smith, and a little saddened that Kline hasn't been in more high-profile films since. If he could briefly elevate this dreck, imagine what he could have done in a good film. Films don't have an idea in their heads. And then, bafflingly, there are some which do have something up there, but it isn't really an idea. It's more like a bubble in the blood supply to the brain. This is the case with Wild Wild West, the new movie starring Will Smith and Kevin Kline and directed by Barry Men in Black Sonnenfeld. This film is, well, what? I was going to say it's a high-tech fantasy western, but that's not really it. That's not the idea. There is no idea. This movie is a brain bubble symptom, a 107-minute Technicolor aneurysm. It is an extended, incoherent Tourette-style yelping of design ideas, soundtrack styles, FX flourishes, rewrites, and mismatched performances. The action is set in the United States after the Civil War. Will Smith is the devastatingly sexy government agent James West, whose wild, super cool charisma is complemented by Kevin Kline as the U.S. Marshal Artemis Gordon, a gadget inventor and master of disguise. Together, they must destroy the evil Dr. Arliss Lovelace, a genocidal wheelchair-bound recidivist from the South who has a master plan to reverse the result of the Civil War. As he is a wicked, reactionary racist, Arliss is, according to hallowed Hollywood tradition, played by a British classical actor, Kenneth Branagh. But that is not all. Arliss has access to an extraordinary range of high-tech stuff from the 21st century, or maybe the 22nd or 23rd century. Chiefly, a gigantic metallic tarantula which clanks across the Western landscape courtesy of George Lucas's now very familiar industrial light and magic techniques. Now, There is a handful of disparate things that you can quite like in all this. Wild Wild West has a catchy, funky theme tune courtesy of Mr. Smith himself, in full, glorious Fresh Prince mode, but we only get it over the closing credits. And it has lots of ingenious and elaborate design, pleasingly reminiscent of Terry Gilliam, and indeed the Coen brothers, with whom Sonnenfeld worked in an earlier stage in his career. But really, what a mess this is. What a terrible, abject mess. It hasn't got the heart to be a Western. It hasn't got the style to be a tech thriller, and it certainly isn't funny enough to be a comedy. The awful thing is that this cut-and-shut alignment of genres might have worked if there was anything resembling a spark between the co-stars. There isn't. Like two glum pandas munching bamboo in London Zoo and refusing to mate, Kevin Kline and Will Smith simply declined to create any sort of on-screen chemistry. They just don't have that Butch and Sundance vibe. Kline himself is slower, plumper, duller, and more stately than I have ever seen him before. Is this the same Kevin Kline who turned on the pyrotechnics in A Fish Called Wanda? It looks like his boring older brother. Moreover, the script means Kline is stuck with having to be solemnly supportive to Smith when the latter reveals that the evil Branagh has destroyed his family in a racial pogrom. For a strange second, Kline's role is uncomfortably similar to his liberal white balancing presence as Donald Woods in Cry Freedom, opposite Denzel Washington's Steve Biko. But the real outrage of this film is the way it wastes the talents of Will Smith. Smith is simply the best young Hollywood leading man around. He looks like $1 million, and he has 100 times the intelligence and style of the two overpaid Toms. He's got the sweetness and likability of a young Jimmy Stewart, and the insouciance of a Gregory Peck or a Cary Grant. So why on earth did this movie not entrust Will Smith with the starring above the title role? If they had done this and let Smith spread his wings as the star with a clear, strong adversarial relationship with Branagh, the film might have caught fire. Instead, the focus is broken pointlessly into two, and the film dragged down into a double act for which neither Kline nor Smith has any relish. But there was evidently no question of letting Will Smith carry a big summer movie on his own. Perhaps that's down to the ordinary commercial racism of mainstream Hollywood, or perhaps it's just unimaginative pusillanimity. If you need a prime example of the hubris and bloating and arrogance of the remake machine in Hollywood, you need look no further than the 1999 film Wild Wild West. Shot as if pre-visualizing the TBS Weekend 8-peat screenings, it would eventually join with Austin Powers and The Mask, the film itself is perfect for hangover theater, like one of the lesser frats mixing jungle juice. It's a terrible movie that you somehow convince yourself isn't that bad. I kind of thought fondly of it until I recently rewatched it at the behest of our supreme overlord. Plotted and manufactured like a Bond movie, it takes two charismatic actors and somehow wrings them free of any possible joviality, all the while bounding through tragically unfunny dialogue and wretchedly stilted action sequences with all the joie de vivre of the girl running the Universal Studios tour on her 7th hour of saving everyone from an animatronic Kong. Hindsight and history prove for even more mockery of the project, specifically that no one who has watched An Evening with Kevin Smith can look at the giant mechanical spider of Arliss Lovelace and not giggle at hairdresser-producer John Peters' obsession with the most vicious killer in the insect kingdom. When people wonder what went wrong with the Green Hornet and try to explain how it's not that bad, I'm simply going to point them to the $3 bargain bin at Target, where Wild Wild West sits among the straight-to-DVD Cuba Gooding and Steven Seagal films. Perspective. Wild Wild West was originally conceived as a Mel Gibson vehicle with Richard Donner set to direct in 1992. Gibson and Donner passed on the project and instead made Maverick in 1994. They had the time to make an entirely different fucking film based on an old television western that got the blessing of the original star before anyone at Warner Brothers started in on the project. Now, as with all projects of this ilk, the cast is going to shuffle and shake. Look at the recent A-Team remake. Bruce Willis was supposed to play Hannibal. One of 3 different rapper-turned-actors were supposed to play B.A., Ryan Reynolds and Woody Harrelson were in line to play Murdoch, and Amber Heard was due to play Sosa. The same, of course, happened with this. Originally, Tom Cruise was circling the drain on this, but as everyone knows, once Mel Gibson abandons a project, the logical choice is to bring in a black actor. George Clooney was considering playing Artemis Gordon, but balked at a supporting role. So we ended up with Kevin Kline and Will Smith. Kevin Kline and Will Smith are good actors, but they've had some rough luck as of late, mostly because they tried to go the exceedingly dramatic route in films that are poor copies of better films. As I stated earlier, these are two charming and charismatic actors. Kline won an Academy Award for his brilliant assholish Otto in A Fish Called Wanda. Will Smith is a nice guy, and he gets a strong pass after showing up in Jersey Girl. I can't imagine what the fuck happened with this script. First of all, one can see from first glance that Will Smith is a black man. But apparently, because the film is set in the 1800s, the screenwriter felt the need to point that out at every juncture. When he isn't making every phallic entendre he can think of, the entire film goes from being a government agent tracking down a supervillain to the blackest black ever to Black a Black. The only reason Artemis Gordon is considered a supporting role is that he takes a back seat to Will Smith's blackness. It went from a remake to a vanity project for Smith, complete with one of his family-friendly rap songs over the credits. I think it's contractually obligated. He just did it in Men in Black 2 years earlier. I put song in quotations because most of it consists of reading the outline of the script while repeating the title of the film to a bass line. Perspective. Wild Wild West cost over $150 million to make, making it the most expensive film of 1999. Now go ahead and do the Google search for Pajiba's Films of 1999 series. All those great films came out, and this was the most expensive film of the lot. And can you tell where a blessed fucking dime of that money went? The entire project looks like it was shot on green screen with mannequins and then reanimated by what was left of Chuck Lorre's animation crew at Warner Brothers. It seriously has the feel and look of a Bugs Bunny cartoon. Apparently, they had to go back and fill in several spots with reshoots to add humor, so they must have dipped into the writer's pool at WB Animation. I kept waiting for Smith to gnaw on a carrot, or Kline to refer to a revolting development. I'm surprised the last showdown didn't take place in Walla Walla or Kalamazoo. Kenneth Branagh joins the rest of the proud pool of British actors who chew the scenery when asked to don crazy facial hair as a villain. Coming from his Shakespearean background, he clearly is the only person to recognize the sheer stupidity and cartoonishness of the project and acts accordingly. As an invalid chopped in half and riding around in a mechanical spider with an army of international saloon gals as his entourage, he's the most cohesive part of the film. But what do you expect from something that's half Bugs Bunny and half Bond? Think about it. We've got our supervillain, Arliss Lovelace. We've got our heroic agent in James West. We're given an inexplicable femme in Salma Hayek. The men track down the low-level henchman, Bloodbath McGrath, Ted Levine, who escapes. The men track down the main boss, who captures them, but they escape. They catch him again, but he thwarts them, puts them in a convoluted technological death trap, which they then escape. They then track him down, where he reveals his ultimate plan, and they defeat him. The action sequences involve enough explosions to shame a bay, but hardly any action. The film's convinced there's tons of fighting going on, but most of the time, it's just either the two principal actors running or Will Smith firing his gun and shooting everyone in sight. I'd use the name of James West, but frankly, there's not a moment in the film where Will Smith doesn't want you to know that it's Will Smith playing one of those sexy, dead-eyed Will Smith heroes. There's no trading of blows or battles. Will Smith knocks through cardboard cutouts like a mongoloid raiding Rupert Pupkin's basement. The final battle sequence involves West and Lovelace fighting in the belly of the spider, after West knocked off the Double Dragon-esque henchmen with various trainwear accoutrements stuck in them. Lovelace turns into a metal half-spider and steps on his face. Artemis Gordon shoots the spider leg, which causes all of the hydraulics everywhere to fail. West stands up and walks menacingly towards Lovelace, who crawls into his wheelchair with the shotgun arm. The shotgun blows out the front legs of the spider, which causes it to dip and which causes West and Lovelace to topple out of the spider. They dangle over the cliff and exchange some more painfully contrived dialogue before West pulls a lever, which dumps them both off into the abyss. Only he catches a chain dangling next to them. He then breathlessly grunts, "Now, that's a whooping." But it's not. Nobody got whooped. That's a dropping. He fell. You made him fall, Jim West. But I know you had to get one more black man reference in before the rap song started. Perspective. Robert Conrad, who starred in the original TV series, went to the Razzies to collect 3 of the 5 awards the film won that year to show how little he thought of the project. Conrad was actually approached to play President Grant, but read the script and told them to fuck off. Here's a tip. If the original people involved with the project, usually actors who haven't worked in anything big budget in years, won't touch your work with a 10-foot pole, consider a rewrite. But it did give Kevin Kline a chance to make yet another movie where he plays multiple characters in the same film. Future SRL, friends. Will Smith later apologized publicly to Conrad a few years later about the quality of the film. Further perspective. Will Smith turned down the lead role in The Matrix to play in Wild Wild West. That's right, the Fresh Prince might have been Neo. What the fuck would that rap song have sounded like? While Wild Wild West goes down as a shameful example of a Western, a TV series remake, a summer blockbuster, it's the steampunk elements that scare me. Because steampunk gets associated with just the worst fucking films. How bad? Wild Wild West is the second best film to use steampunk, behind The City of Lost Children. What others have used it? The Guy Pearce Time Machine, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, The Golden Compass, and most notably, Sky Captain and The World of Tomorrow. And there are people who will fight me on those films, claiming not all of them are actual. And there are more elements of German expressionism in Sky Captain than steampunk, but you'd be missing the point, which is, name me one quality steampunk film. For a genre that's so awesome and inspires such remarkable costuming and conceptualism, how do they consistently fuck it up that bad? Wild Wild West will continue to play on TBS with the rest of the Will Smith canon, which they are actually adding to in spades. See, I can make terribly offensive black puns too, writers of Warner Brothers. Will Smith goes through 2 phases as an actor. Gimme an Oscar and gimme a paycheck. He's just kind of spilling through the Oscar phase the rest of this year, and then you'll see him full-on paycheck mode. Ready? Bad Boys 3, Men in Black 3, and Independence Day 2, just so they can quickly make Independence Day 3. Also, he's doing a prequel to I Am Legend and I, Robot 2. Holy fucking sequel garbage. But you know what he's not doing a sequel to? Hitch. Because that was a terrible fucking movie. It's actually being made into a television series now. I'm not opposed to remakes and adaptations with the same blind rage I once had, because I think if you have something interesting to say or a neat take, you can do a lot with the material. I think if the statement you are trying to make is, gimme a paycheck, then you should reconsider the wisdom of the project. I'm looking at you, Judd Apatow's crew. Yeah, the vampire musical was cute, but don't fuck with the Muppets. 21 Jump Street was a television show. But what are you bringing new to the table, Jonah Hill? Do you even remember the original Green Hornet? Neither do you, Seth Rogen. Just remember, kids, you too could be rapping at the end of The Matrix. Perhaps it was the impending Y2K that inspired filmmakers to dream up the best stories, or maybe they were desperate to get them released before the end of the world. But 1999 had a lot of stellar films. From Fight Club to The Sixth Sense and Magnolia to Being John Malkovich, 99 unleashed a huge number of films that are still celebrated today. Wild Wild West is a well-known member of the 99 Club too, but nothing to celebrate. Will Smith infamously passed on playing Neo in The Matrix 1999 to star as Captain Jim West in this notorious box office bomb. This trivia prompts a comparison between the 2 sci-fi films and helps keep attention on Wild Wild West. Perhaps if it wasn't for that stark contrast, Wild Wild West might have, and should have, disappeared quietly into the long list of terrible movies ever produced. Another factor that makes Wild Wild West stand out is its budget. At $170 million, it was a staggeringly expensive film to produce for the time. In comparison, The Matrix, with its game-changing bullet-time VFX, only cost Warner Bros. $63 million, and George Lucas's long-awaited Star Wars Episode I Phantom Menace cost $150 million to make. It's unsurprising that the producers, Barry Sonnenfeld, also the director, and John Peters, thought this film deserved that expenditure. After all, even 20 years later, remakes are seen as a safer choice compared to taking a risk on original material. The Wild Wild West filmmakers banked on the sci-fi craze at the time and assumed that a popular 1960s TV series would please cinema audiences. That would explain why the casting involved a revolving door of A-list actors. Mel Gibson and George Clooney expressed interest in the characters of brash cowboy Jim West and crazy inventor Artemis Gordon over its 5 years of development. If this was the reason the filmmakers didn't put a lot of effort into the plot, it was an expensive mistake. Even with Will Smith headlining, Wild Wild West barely recouped its production costs and received 5 Razzie Awards, including one for Worst Picture. I have to admit, though, I saw Wild Wild West in the cinema as a child and thought it was silly but fun. It had big stunts, Will Smith, and steampunk elements that really fascinated me. The insanely catchy Wild Wild West tie-in pop song also stayed with me. Over the last few decades, I've heard that my initial thoughts on the film might need some revision, and upon rewatching it as an adult, yeah, Wild Wild West deserves all the Razzies it got. This film is just a huge disappointment considering Barry Sonnenfeld and Will Smith made the superb Men in Black 1997 together, just 2 years before. There's no cult status waiting in the wings here, as the film has aged even more poorly than expected. The plot is wafer-thin, with a story revolving around the reluctant teammates as they work together to save the newly minted United States from a villainous ex-Confederate scientist. Will Smith as Jim West made sense on paper because this suave cowboy who catches villains was only a stone's throw away from the street-smart Agent J he played in Men in Black. If you closed your eyes and removed the premise, Smith's lines could easily have been transplanted over verbatim. Kevin Kline, playing both Artemis Gordon and the then-President Ulysses S. Grant, somehow has to deal with more time-appropriate dialogue, as do the rest of the cast. It's jarring to hear and keeps you detached from the story. All one's brain hears is, what's Will Smith doing in this weird cowboy town? And he's not even the one who stands out the most. The actor who suffers the greatest is Kenneth Branagh as villainous Dr. Arliss Lovelace, a wheelchair-bound man hell-bent on destroying the United States. His dialogue is almost impressively bad, married to an awful Southern accent. He aims for charmingly evil and unhinged, a la Austin Powers' Dr. Evil, but ends up as a cringeworthy, inept B-movie adversary. It's painful to watch. Wild Wild West also tries too hard to recreate Men in Black's tone, but fails due to the premise. Men in Black worked because it was grounded in reality, just as Sonnenfeld's other successes had been. The Addams Family, 1991, was rooted in our love for our family, regardless of how weird they were. But this film is set in a sci-fi version of the post-American Civil War period, with steampunk machinery and no consistent vision tying the film together. As a viewer, we couldn't laugh at the jokes because we didn't have a baseline from which to find absurdity in its reality. The whole film was bizarre. Consequently, the many elements that would seem like parody or satire fall flat. When Smith's hero and the villain exchange barbs, the former's insistence on making fun of the latter's physical disability is downright offensive. The fact that Salma Hayek, who'd quickly gaining attention after Desperado, 1995, and From Dusk Till Dawn, 1996, plays eye candy both protagonists lust after, which isn't surprising for female action comedy roles of the time. But it makes your heart ache when you know that she's just 3 years away from delivering her exceptional performance in Frida, 2002. Wild Wild West doesn't even allow you to turn off your brain and enjoy the action. Most of the fight scenes are hampered by too much CGI, which isn't dreadfully integrated, but ends up being the only message the film gives. Look at how much money we have. We can create a mechanical spider upon which you can fight on. We can even make Kenneth Branagh look like a spider, too. In the end, this film is so bad that even the star himself regrets it. In a 2016 interview, Will Smith admitted he only signed on because he wanted to keep being a box office winner after Bad Boys 1995, Independence Day 1996, and Men in Black. That was 17 years after the film had come out, and yet people were still asking him about it because he gave up The Matrix for it. That shows the impact of this, but very expensive blip on his resume, and makes one wonder what impact a better script or lower budget could have made. In the viewing of nearly every movie, there must be some suspension of disbelief to enjoy the movie. If there is a questioning of the accuracy of every event in a movie, where's the enjoyment? From The Spanish Prisoner to The Phantom Menace, the audience needs to make some leap of judgment. However, Wild Wild West abuses the rule over and over and over to such a degree that finding an event in the movie that is believable is like looking for intelligence in a Pauly Shore film. This disbelief goes beyond just supermagnetical neck restraint, the turbo-powered bicycle, and the 100-foot-high mechanical spider. Lest you believe that Wild Wild West takes place in the future, Ulysses S. Grant is the movie's U.S. president, and since you're asking, mechanical spiders are generally considered to be invented post-Grant. No, the disbelief starts with the relationship between the two major protagonists, James T. West, Will Smith, and Artemis Gordon, Kevin Kline. They are supposedly working together, while harboring a less-than-secret dislike of each other, on stopping the Confederate-loving double-amputee villain Dr. Arliss Lovelace, Kenneth Branagh, from taking over the United States with the financial help of France and Spain, among other nations. Independently, West and Gordon could be considered believable, I suppose, but together they have no chemistry at all. It often feels like either Smith or Kline is working in front of a blue screen with the image of the other projected on it. They are both in their own little acting world, and they see no reason to let the other actor in. Because of that, the most interesting character in the movie is the evil Lovelace. Ha ha. What a clever name. But even Branagh's portrayal is often tired and uninteresting. As should be evident by the appearance of a giant metal spider, Wild Wild West tries harder to be a comedy than a Western. The humor in the film is primarily racial and sexual, occasionally blending the two together into something even more annoying. The Zenith is an incident where West pounds on a woman's breasts, then explains it away by saying it was a common greeting for his people back in Africa. Most of the rest of the humor is broad slapstick, but even those who enjoy that brand of humor will likely be disappointed by the small number of events that work successfully. The general tone of the humor in Wild Wild West will cause the most concern to Christians, especially because of the two instances of partial nudity that are used in that manner. There are occasional scenes of violence, mostly of the action cartoonish sort, except for one quite gruesome sight at the very beginning. The language is cleaner than one expects in a PG-13 movie, which isn't saying much. But overall, the movie is such a black hole of humor that why in the world would anyone want to see it anyway, Christian or not? At one particularly explosive stage in this eager-to-please holiday parade, an entire Western town is systematically blown to bits. Among the buildings demolished, one shop sign clearly reads, Kasdan's Ironmongers, a sly reference perhaps to writer-director Lawrence Kasdan, who in 1985's Silverado attempted to make an old-fashioned Western with newfangled neuroses. Perhaps Barry Sonnenfeld is symbolically destroying Kasdan's stall, saying, no, this is how you modernize the seemingly moribund cowboy genre, sunshine. Reading anything into Wild Wild West is a bit like seeking the truth in a plate of alphabet spaghetti. Adapted from a spoofy 1960s TV show once described as Maverick meets the Man from U.N.C.L.E. and assured a wham-bam family bucket July 4th opening by bankable star Will Smith, it was never going to be anything other than an expensive piece of gadget-driven hokum. Big star, big effects, big hit song. What could possibly go wrong? Everything, if you believe virtually every critic in America. WW has endured name-calling to embarrass any playground. It's not that bad, of course, but it's no Men in Black hats, and that was surely the idea. In the aftermath of the Civil War, snake-hipped government gunslinger James West, Smith, is teamed with boffinly master of disguise Artemis Gordon, a likable Kline, at the behest of President Ulysses Grant. Kline again, for no good reason other than egomania or budget capping. Aggrieved Confederate inventor Dr. Arliss Lovelace, Branagh, has developed a vast weapon of mass destruction, the show-stopping mechanical tarantula, with which he intends to create a divided states of America. Our heroes track him down in their customized train, picking up the vengeful beauty Rita, Hayek, along the way, and build to an effects-crazy duel in the Utah desert. There's not much else to say about the story. It's merely an excuse for a truly dazzling fusion of model work, matte and CGI, exemplified by the screen-eating tarantula and Branagh's motorized wheelchair. Lovelace, you see, is legless, a seamless digital illusion road-tested by Gary Sinise in Forrest Gump. Jules Verne-inspired, this is the past looking to the future, but fed by the present. The smoke-spewing contraptions are satisfyingly rickety, satanic, and sort of 19th century looking, but they still serve to unbalance the historical mythical setting, as if the idea of Will Smith cleaning up the Old West wasn't sensational enough. As ever these days, it's a case of, let me through, I'm an effects supervisor. Tellingly, outside of Branagh's panto silliness and Kline's incessant dressing up, human performance seems to be positively discouraged. Perhaps that's why Emmett Walsh is the only other half-recognizable supporting player. It's a pity this supposed family entertainment exerts such laddish exuberance. Pushed-up cleavages are everywhere you look, and Hayek is insultingly called upon to do little more than be shapely. The scene where our heroes lasciviously ogle her exposed bottom is pure Benny Hill. The script veers uneasily between weak gags, Kline naming his flying machine the Air Gordon, and some spectacularly misjudged white guilt-tripping about slavery as delivered by Smith, who must sweet-talk some rednecks to stop himself getting lynched at one, especially uncomfy, apparently comedic juncture. The kids in the audience with Empire just wanted him to fall in the mud again. Now that's funny. Tony Blair recently complained that he had scars on his back from trying to precipitate change in the public sector. If that's the case, Will Smith must bear the marks of permanent spinal injury after carrying Wild Wild West to the box office, only to be swatted aside when the so-called mechanology is on view. It's obviously a thankless task being a human in late 90s blockbusters, but then we're expected to pay for it. And what thanks do we get? In an interview with Time magazine in 2016, Will Smith confessed his decision to star in Wild Wild West, and turning down the role of Neo in The Matrix was driven by his hunger for fame. With that, Wild Wild West became a notorious and expensive box office flop. It cost $170 million to produce, which dwarfed The Matrix's $63 million, and Star Wars Episode I: The Phantom Menace's $115 million, and pulled in over $222 million in global box office sales. Well, in viewing the film today, it's flawed in places, but also it wasn't a total and utter mess that was unwatchable for me. In 1869, an ex-Confederate soldier by the name of Dr. Lovelace threatens the then U.S. President Ulysses S. Grant, insisting he'll take over the country with the aid of a weapon of mass destruction, which was built by some scientists who have been kidnapped by Lovelace. The president assigns and sends out 2 U.S. Marshals, a cowboy in Jim West and Armitage Gordon, a specialist who creates inventions and technology. He is the film's equivalent to Q from the 007 James Bond movies, who both go in search for this weapon, to destroy it, and to rescue the scientists. Granted, Kevin Kline can be a fine dramatic actor, yet seeing his turn here further reinforces my view that he can still knock it out of the park in comedy-based movies. See Soap Dish Dave, A Fish Called Wanda. That, and he can be a great character actor as well with his self-serving and sufficing wit. His chemistry with Smith as Dr. Armitage Gordon and Jim West's sidekick I thought worked like a charm, and as a buddy pairing, they didn't feel mismatched. Although in the straight man role, he tries to inject some drollery. Okay, it can be argued that Barry Sonnenfeld was replicating the black guy, white guy duo thing from Men in Black, but by trading in Tommy Lee Jones for Kline, whilst they may be an unlikely proposition, it was good that they didn't make Smith's James West a wacky and over-the-top silly character. Will Smith was less Big Willie-style Will Smith, and still, he fared well on screen. Kenneth Branagh overacts in his portrayal of a brash Southern villain who looks French, what with that curly-twirly moustache, and hams things up. And it kind of works. Whilst Ted Levine, Flubber, The Silence of the Lambs, briefly appears as Dr. Arliss Lovelace's right-hand man. It's a pity the script didn't supplement their acting efforts. Still, they give it their all, and they get A for effort. The weak spots in terms of characters must go out to the female actresses, Salma Hayek and Garcelle Beauvais, whose roles as the one-note eye candy types were pointless. Contrary to the critics, this is a quirky take on the Western genre, and as hybrid movies go, this is one of the most creatively ambitious I've seen. And it's dumb, silly, quirky, barmy, and Will Smith in drag posing as a belly dancer. Check. And you thought Will Smith as the genie in the live-action Aladdin was his only weird moment. Kevin Kline also in drag. Check. Weaponized metal breasts. Check. Over the years, the original Men in Black seems to have aged well, regardless of how many times it gets shown on TV, whilst due to the critical lashing Wild Wild West received and some of the problems the film poses, Barry Sonnenfeld's not-quite successor to 1997's mega-hit made it on various worst films of the 1990s and latter 1990s lists. If only the story had a lot more weight and managed to hold itself up to the very end. For all the special effects and how snazzy it looks visually with its wacky gadgets, nifty-looking weapons, and fights on a moving train, the story remains static as it is slim. There needed to be more energy, more creativity. One or two extra plot twists would have made a difference, and there were occasions where it felt like I was waiting for something huge and out of the ordinary to happen. As for the comedy and humor, it was sketchy and it should have been consistent. But when it tried to inject some witty repartee and wisecracks, thanks to Kline especially, that wasn't too bad. Wild Wild West still has certain reasonable entertainment value going for it. I quite like the steampunk theme, and whilst the plot and story could have been far more effective and stronger, and the film is all over the place, Will Smith and Kevin Kline's on-screen charm and appeal gave the film a bit of a boost. Smith's performance might have been lambasted by many, but arguably he has appeared in worse fare than this. Cough. Shark Tale, After Earth, anyone? I will get round to seeing Suicide Squad, which received a thrashing by critics when it was released back in 2016. A mindless, light-hearted Western romp, which is almost in the similar vein and operates in a similar universe to Shanghai Noon and Nights with Jackie Chan and Owen Wilson, it's not as outright horrible as the critics have made it out to be. And sure, it could have been a better movie. It's not a very good one, and sure, it's not a comedy classic. But this still isn't bad in my eyes either. Wild Wild West is part Shanghai Noon, part Around the World in 80 Days, with the added futuristic feel of Men in Black, but not enough of its sharpness, consistency, and quality narrative-wise, and plus, it needed more vigor. West is at one point shot at point-blank range with a pistol, which causes him to fall from the top of the mechanical spider to the ground below. He survives the gunshot wound because he's wearing a bulletproof vest, but the fall really should have broken his back. This is something that could be written off as just one of those things that happens in action movies, but in the climax of the film, he has a four-way fist fight with a bunch of loveless goons in which falling from the spider is meant to be a dangerous thing. But why is it dangerous? It didn't kill him the first time, and then he wasn't preparing to fall. He only fell because someone shot him. Why doesn't he just jump down whenever things get too rough, dust himself off, then climb back up? Wild Wild West not only doesn't have any grounding in our reality, it has no grounding in its own reality. All of this wouldn't be so bad if the stupidity was fun and interesting, but the film is fantastically dull. I saw Wild Wild West in the cinema back in 1999, and I'd remembered it being about 3 hours long. It turns out it was just the procession of airless, boring action sequences limply strung together that made me think that as for the cast, they all appear to be starring in very different movies. Smith plays the Will Smith character, a smooth-talking ladies' man who is equally as quick with either a quip or a fist, who seems to have wandered on from the set of Bad Boys. Smith's character is the most problematic, since in casting a black actor in a film that takes place in the South during Reconstruction, it forces the film to grapple with the racial aspects of the period. Whilst that would be commendable in, say, a revisionist Western, It feels horribly out of place in a silly blockbuster, and the constant jokes about slavery make the film a much quaser experience than it ever needed to. Kenneth Branagh, meanwhile, seems to have been cast as the villain in a James Bond movie written by Yo Sam. He's a grotesque caricature who is too over the top to be menacing, but who is too openly violent to be funny. He embodies the film's general attitude towards women and sex, which is both juvenile and weirdly chaste. It's a film which references SM and uses crude double entendres, like cramming a man's private things into some hole, actually that may just be a single entendre, in which there is never really any chance that either Smith or Kline will get together with ostensible love interest Salma Hayek, just as the film is obsessed with people getting shot, but hardly ever shows any blood. It is obsessed with sex, but never comes remotely close to actually being sexy. The one saving grace of the film is Kevin Kline, who delivers an often hilarious deadpan performance that nicely undercuts the absurdity of everything going on around him watching Wild Wild West the second time through. I was surprised by how much he managed to get out of a part that was clearly intended as nothing more than a foil for Smith, and a little saddened that Kline hasn't been in more high-profile films. Since if he could briefly elevate this dreck, imagine what he could have done in a good film Kenneth Branagh, as I get that this is his attempt at Rickman's Sheriff, but it's so far off the mark that it stinks. And that is beautiful. If it wasn't for this performance, I would not have trusted Branagh as Lockhart and Potter to me. This was the stuffy Shakespeare dude who sang the theme tune, wrote the theme tune when it came to his 1996 Hamlet. And I just didn't like what he represented until this. I knew he was and is an incredible actor. I appreciated what he was attempting in accepting the role, and it showed me he wasn't the perfectionist I thought he was. I will also point out I didn't know it was him until much later. Kevin Kline provides a straight man foil of a similar ilk to Rimmer in Red Dwarf. Now, the chemistry between him and Smith doesn't quite work. Smith is no liar. However, the only person who could have played it better would have been Chris Berry himself. The element of Jim West's story, the loss of his parents, comes in way too late. We're way past the halfway mark, when it is revealed why West is hell-bent on apprehending. General McGrath played a little too well by Ted Levine. This encouraged the audience to engage more with the character. The CGI still stands up, yes. That should be a good thing. However, it's an indicator that the budget was not well distributed, and more could have been diverted to the script. After all, what's the point in having stunning visuals if no one will watch them? Because of this, it fails, where both Hamilton and Django Unchained succeeded. Instead of it being a commentary about racism, it simply presents a black character in a heavily racist landscape. The script then also attempts to challenge the racist commentary with comedic wordplay at the time of its release. This would have gone over my head, but watching it today, just be passive-aggressive. How nice you could join us and add color to these monochromatic proceedings with when a fella comes back from the dead. I find it an occasion to stand up and be counted. Does not negate the racism or the ableist intent either, for that matter, without getting too deep into the social politics of this, because I simply don't know enough to truly comment. However, by making a joke of confederative thinking could confuse younger viewers on what is and isn't appropriate to say in society on a similar note, I would say much of the same applies to the treatment and commentary of women, particularly those of heavier body shapes. It certainly also applies to Artemis and his concealing himself as a woman during missions. It's hard to know if we should see it as the art form of drag or as being coded trans. Either way, the fact that the payoff is that James West mistakes cis woman as Amos makes the whole thing in bad taste. Extra information. Wild Wild West is another one of those cinematic remakes of old TV shows. Like many, I haven't watched the original Wild Wild West show on television that aired in the 1960s. From what I've read, though, the premise sounds interesting. It's a Western, but it has a touch of science fiction to it. With the mix, it's essentially like having James Bond wear a cowboy outfit instead of a tuxedo. Interesting about combining two genres that would seem impossible to mesh. The idea didn't turn me off at all. I would be interested in any Western, sci-fi, or sci-fi Westerns, depending on which one dominates when I saw the trailer for this Wild Wild West remake with a giant mechanical spider. I thought it seemed cool. Yes, I knew it was a sci-fi element in a Western setting, but I was intrigued by it. The movie features Kenneth Branagh as the villain, an evil inventor named Dr. Arles Lovelace. The idea of that seems interesting enough. Even the fact that President Ulysses S. Grant appears in this movie was something I noted. As for the heroes, you have Will Smith as James West and Kevin Kline as Artemis Gordon, and Salma Hayek plays a role too. But that's pretty much the extent to which I liked the movie. There was nothing else I liked about Wild Wild West. Basically, despite my appreciation for the actors and the premise, the script is crap. There is so little momentum in the plot to make the audience feel excited about the on-screen heroes. And the plot, there is also little chemistry between Smith and Kline again. I like the actors themselves, but when they're forced to do a poorly written script, I could not help but feel sorry for them. Even if they wanted to get out of this movie, they've already signed the contract. This is one of those movies where I just felt bored, and I mean pretty bored. By the time the climactic action sequence arrived, I no longer cared. I just wanted to get the movie over with and get out of the theater. When I saw the final scene involving a ride into the sunset, a staple of many Westerns, I was like, whatever. Oh, and the last scene with Mahek was one that made in other words, she barely has character development. Then in her last scene, she reveals something about herself to the two main characters. It's something that I could care more about if it were a lot more important earlier in the story. Wild Wild West is your typical Hollywood story, as in how typical it is for a Hollywood movie to make itself look promising in trailers, but be nothing but a bunch of trash when people actually see it. I did want my $10 back that day, so if you like Will Smith, any of the other actors, or the premise of a sci-fi Western, stay away from Wild Wild West, big stars and special effects. Do not make up for an inadequate script enough, said the TV series The Wild Wild West 1965-9 was one of the better of a host of films and TV series that leapt on the 1960s spy film bandwagon following the enormous success of the James Bond films. The Wild Wild West was memorable for cross-hatching the spy film with Western TV series of the time. A Lag and Smoke, 1955-75 Maverick, 1957-62 Raid 1959-66, and Bonanza 1959-73. The series had a tongue-in-cheek deadpan that willfully concatenated Western action with colorfully eccentric supervillains and anachronous inventions. Wild Wild West is directed by Barry Sonnenfeld. Barry Sonnenfeld was a cinematographer on films like Raising, Arizona 1987, When Harry Met Sally 1989, and Misery 1990, before inheriting the director's chair on The Addams Family 1991, largely by accident that they needed the nearest available person after the previous director bowed out. Since The Addams Family, Sonnenfeld went on to further success with Addams Family Values 1993, Get Shorty 1995, and the mega hit of Men in Black 1997. The Addams Family films were enjoyable, and Get Shorty was Sonnenfeld's best, largely due to John Travolta on top form and a tight script. From an Elmore Leonard novel, however, with the uneven Men in Black, and most certainly with Wild Wild West, and his next film, Men in Black 2, 2002, Sonnenfeld seemed in imminent danger of being buried under the machinery of the big-budget box office vehicle. Sonnenfeld's forte is clearly mainstream comedy. He was perfectly at home in the arch-mock kinkiness of the Addams Family films and the snowballing wit of Get Shorty, with Men in Black 1, could see Sonnenfeld failing to hit the stride, and the film uneasily alternating between deadpan and strident farce Wild Wild West and Sonnenfeld's subsequent flop. Nuclear bomb comedy Big Trouble 2002 seemed to represent all of Sonnenfeld's failings. RIT Large Wild Wild West seems more of a film construed in terms of a package of box office drawcards than it is a film, a big screen remake of a 1960s TV series, large-scale action, CGI effects, box office stars, especially flavor of the year Will Smith doing the Will Smith eye-rolling jocular asides thing, as well as names such as Kevin Kline, Kenneth Branagh, and Salma Hayek along for the ride, a good deal of audience-pleasing humor, a Burger King promotional tie-in, and a rap soundtrack by Will, as it emerges on Screen Wild Wild West is a great piece of packaging that, when unwrapped, has all the substance of trying to meal on. Something like Dairy Whip Wild Wild West is not a film that takes itself seriously. Not necessarily a problem, but it is not even a film that wants you to take it seriously either, and advertises such in loud and clear terms. If the 1960s Wild Wild West was born out of the Sean Connery Bond films, then the Wild Wild West movie must be the equivalent of the Roger Moore on films, where the chic sophistication of the originals has become supplanted by overinflated big-budget excess, a campy silliness, and an unserious attitude on the part of the leads that shows that they are not taking any of the proceedings with a straight face. The original Wild Wild West never took things too seriously either. But the difference between the two is that Wild Wild West 1999 pitches itself at such a level of audience-pleasing humor that it collapses into a circus of noise and thunder whose entire arsenal of humor is a series of level pratfalls. There are endless unfunny scenes with Will Smith bunging underneath a train-rotating billiard table gags Will Smith, falling out of a water tower where he has been lovemaking and having to take on gunmen naked, and a good deal of dumb fooling around with magneti metal collars. There is a gag with Will Smith and Kevin Kline trying on a set of false breasts and their various comments being misinterpreted as gay male banter, where the film goes on in a singularly unfunny way that seems to demand we applaud it for making such clever double entendres. Ditto is seen with Smith and Kline falling over themselves, making Freudian slips about breasts and butts at the sight of Hayek in Long Johns. At the point of the climax, where Will Smith rescues Kevin Kline from a firing squad by dressing up as a haram girl. You sit there in disbelief at how staggeringly unfunny the scene is, and realize you are in the midst of a mega million-dollar carry-on film. Of course, Wild Wild West, lack of seriousness in laugh itself should have been signaled even before one enters the theater, and saw that the character of James West had been cast with a black superstar. Now, one's support of affirmative action employment and joy in seeing that racial equality has reached a point where a black star can carry a major box office success aside, this is a piece of casting that seems to fly absurdly in the face of any type of historical credibility. The film's date of 1869 comes only 4 years after the end of the American and Civil War, and 4 years after the formation of the Ku Klux Klan. Admittedly, there were black congressmen at the time, but the film's casting seems to blatantly disregard the social position of African Americans in the particular day and age. There is one attempt to deal with the issue where Will Smith tries to convince a Southern lynch mob out of hanging him by telling them the virtues of being rednecks. Red is because you're passionate and neck. Well, I can't seem to say anything about neck that does such a bad job in making a joke out of a serious issue that it borders on the offensive. There are minor pluses. Some of the anachronistic steampunk gadgetry is cute flying buzzsaws, rocket bicycles, Da Vinci flying machines, tanks, gramophone earpieces and sleeves with spring-loaded guns and notebooks. Not to mention the big set piece of a giant steam-powered mechanical tarantula. There is also one cute sight gag with Will Smith tying a horse up outside the White House amid the cast. Will Smith plays with the likable average guy sense of humor that has made him an effortless box office star. Kevin Kline, a charismatic box office star in his own right, seems uncustomary, subdued as the second banana. Kenneth Branagh has always shown a tendency toward a broad theatrical flamboyance when on screen. As the villain of the piece, the film grants him the opportunity to indulge his proclivity toward overacting. With shameless regard, he leaps in and plays with an outrageously over-the-top Southern accent, and as a result, steals the show. Hayek, one of the sexiest actresses of the moment, is capable of a genuine passion and fire when given the chance. But the film wastes her in a part that is no more than cursory feminine. Window dressing. This film, directed by Barry Sonnenfeld, screenplay by CIS. Wilson Brenman, Jeffrey Price. Peter is Seaman's story by John Thomas, produced by John Peters. Barry Sonnenfeld, starring Will Smith, Kevin Kline, Kenneth Branagh, Soma, Ted cinematography, Michael Ballhaus, edited by Jam, music by Elmer, Bernstein Production Companies, Peters Entertainment, Sonnenfeld-Josephson, Worldwide Entertainment, distributed by Warner Brothers, release date June 30th. 1999 in United States, running time 106 minutes, country United States language. English budget $170 million, box office $222.4 million. So guys, this is the review of Wild Wild West movie and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting, and if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.